Alara stood at the edge of the ballroom, a glass of untouched champagne in her hand, and felt the weight of 100 indifferent glances slide past her as if she were made of air. She was the Duchess of Ashworth, but tonight she felt less visible than the footmen stationed along the walls. The candlelight flickered over silk gowns and glittering jewels, laughter swelling and fading like waves, but none of it reached her. Her husband, Alexander, the Duke of Ashworth, stood across the room in conversation with Lord Harrington, his expression as unreadable as carved marble. He had not looked at her once since they arrived. Not once. She had walked in on his arm, her gloved fingers resting in the crook of his elbow, and he had escorted her to the edge of the dance floor with the stiff courtesy a man might offer a distant acquaintance before drifting away into the crowd. He did not glance back. It had been like this for 6 months. 6 months of polite silence, of shared meals where he spoke more to his steward than to her, of nights spent in separate chambers. And yet, she had told herself it would change. She had woven hope out of threads so thin they barely existed. Behind her, a cluster of ladies whispered, their voices carrying the particular cruelty of those who believe themselves unheard. Do you see how he ignores her? They say he married her out of pity. Pity, perhaps, or her family's land. The Morwen estate borders Ashworth perfectly, a very convenient merger. She looks so plain tonight. No wonder he keeps his distance. He must regret it terribly. The words landed like small, sharp stones on the bare skin of her heart. Alara's fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. She would not cry, not here, not in front of them. She set the glass down carefully on a passing tray, her hand steady, and turned away before anyone could see the brightness gathering in her eyes. She had learned over these long months to wear a mask of serene composure. It was her only armor. Beneath it, the young woman who had once laughed easily, who had dreamed of love with all the foolish hope of a girl raised on poetry, was slowly fading into silence. The walk to the terrace doors felt endless. She stepped outside into the cool night air, the music and chatter muffling behind her. The stars were scattered across the sky like careless diamonds, and for a moment she simply breathed. She did not expect him to follow. He never did. And that, she realized with a hollow ache, was the hardest part of all. She had stopped being surprised by his absence. The hope that had once fluttered in her chest each time a door opened was gone now. In its place was a quiet, spreading numbness. She looked back through the glass doors at the golden ballroom, at Alexander's tall, broad-shouldered figure as he listened to something the Viscount said. He gave a brief nod, the firelight catching the severe lines of his face. Even now, she could not deny that he was arrestingly handsome. But his beauty was a cold one, like a winter landscape, offering no warmth. 6 months earlier, she had believed this marriage might save her. Now she understood it had only exchanged one form of loneliness for another. The memory of that time still haunted her. Alara's father, the kind and bookish Viscount Morwen, had died of a fever the previous winter, leaving behind a daughter, a crumbling estate, and a mountain of debt she had known nothing about. She had sat in the solicitor's office, numb with grief, as the grim numbers were laid before her. The estate would be seized by creditors. The manor would be sold. And before that could happen, an offer had arrived, one delivered with a thick, greedy hand. Baron Blackthorne, a man whose reputation for cruelty was whispered even in polite drawing-rooms, had proposed to settle the debts in exchange for her hand in marriage. Alara had felt the walls closing in. The Baron was a man with cold, flat eyes and a smile that never touched them. She had seen him once at a county fair, and the way he looked at her had made her skin crawl. The thought of belonging to him, of being trapped in his household with no escape, had filled her with a terror so deep she could barely eat or sleep. Then, like something out of a half-remembered fairy tale, another offer had come. The Duke of Ashworth, a man she had never met, sent his solicitor with a simple proposal: marriage, immediate and practical, with all debts settled, and the Morwen lands absorbed into his holdings. In return, She would become a duchess and live in the splendor of Ashworth Hall. There was no mention of affection. The letter, written in a crisp, formal hand, stated that he required a wife of good breeding and that she, through unfortunate circumstances, required protection. It had not felt like rescue. It had felt like being pulled from a rushing river onto a raft made of ice. But she had said yes because the alternative was a nightmare. She remembered the wedding day with painful clarity. The ceremony was small and quiet, held in the chapel at Ashworth Hall. Alexander had stood beside her, tall and unmoving, reciting his vows in a voice devoid of emotion. When the priest pronounced them man and wife, he had lifted her veil, placed a chaste kiss on her forehead, and released her hands as though the contact burned him. That night she had sat in her new chamber, a vast and beautiful room with silk hangings and a fire crackling in the hearth, and waited. She had brushed her hair until it shone, her heart pattering with nerves. Hours passed. The clock struck midnight, then 1. He never came. The maid who brought her morning chocolate had found her asleep in a chair by the window, still in her wedding gown. The message had been unmistakable. This was a marriage of paper and obligation, nothing more. The quiet rejection had stung worse than open cruelty ever could. In the weeks that followed, Alara tried. She really tried. She learned that Alexander preferred simple meals, so she instructed the cook to prepare roast chicken with herbs the way his mother once had. She lingered in the library at the hour he often came to read, hoping to draw him into conversation. She asked gentle questions about the estate, about his boyhood, about his favorite books. He answered in clipped, courteous sentences, never rude but never inviting. There were moments, fleeting, heart-stopping moments, when something shifted behind his gray eyes. Once she had come into the garden at dusk to find him standing alone by the fountain, his expression unguarded and tired. He had looked at her then with an emotion she could not name, something that made her breath catch. For a single suspended heartbeat she thought he might speak, might finally let the wall crack. Then his features shuttered, and he gave a curt nod and walked inside. Another evening, she had gathered her courage and asked him outright, "Do you regret marrying me, Your Grace?" He had paused, his hand resting on the back of a chair, and for a long moment he did not answer. The silence had been worse than any words. Then, without meeting her eyes, he had said, "Regret is a luxury neither of us can afford, madam. We have duties. Let that be enough." It was not enough. It was never enough. But after that night she stopped asking. The hope that had flickered so stubbornly inside her began to gutter. She stopped waiting by the window for his horse to appear on the drive. She stopped arranging little surprises for him. Slowly, painfully, she began to let go of the dream that had never truly been hers to hold. Spring arrived, painting the Ashworth countryside with tender green, and with it came a quiet transformation in Alara. She could not heal her marriage, but she could heal herself. She refused to let the cold silence of Ashworth Hall bury her entirely. She started small. She asked the estate steward, Mr. William Hale, if she might learn more about the tenants and the land. Hale was a gentleman of modest birth, a few years older than herself, with kind brown eyes and an unhurried way of speaking that put people at ease. He was surprised by her request but quickly warmed to her genuine interest. Together they visited the cottages at the edge of the estate, where the farm laborers lived with their families. Alara saw children with patched clothes and bright, curious faces. She saw mothers who worked tirelessly and still found time to smile. She saw a world that needed small, practical kindnesses, and she discovered that she had hands capable of giving them. She began bringing baskets of food and medicine. She sat with elderly tenants and listened to their stories. She helped organize a tiny school in the village hall, using her own pin money to buy slates and chalk. For the first time since her father's death, she felt useful. She felt seen, not as a duchess or a failure of a wife, but simply as herself. The change was not lost on the staff. The housekeeper, Mrs. Bell, began to smile at her more warmly. The maids no longer walked on eggshells around her. Even the gruff old butler, Simmons, once remarked, It does my heart good to see your grace with color in her cheeks." Alexander, however, seemed to notice nothing, or so she believed. One afternoon, Alara returned from the village later than usual, her boots muddy and her hair windswept. She was laughing at something William Hale had said, her face bright with simple joy. As the cart pulled up before the main doors, she looked up and saw Alexander standing at the top of the stone steps, his figure rigid against the backdrop of the great house. His face was carved in hard lines, and his gaze was fixed not on her, but on the steward. "Your Grace," William said, his own smile fading as he bowed respectfully to the Duke. "I was just escorting her Grace back from the village. The roads are rather rough after the rain." "I am aware of the condition of my own roads," Alexander said, his voice ice. He did not look at Alara. "You may go, Hale." The steward gave a quick nod, his cheeks coloring slightly, and hurried away. Alara climbed the steps, suddenly aware of the pounding of her own heart. She had done nothing wrong, yet she felt like a child caught in some misbehavior. "You were gone all day," Alexander said, his tone clipped. "I did not know your whereabouts." She paused and lifted her chin. "I was seeing to the school, Your Grace. I did not think you would concern yourself with my daily schedule. You never have before." A muscle ticked in his jaw. Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps, or irritation at her directness. "It is a matter of your safety. I will not have my wife roaming the countryside unattended." "I was not unattended. Mr. Hale accompanied me, as he always does." "Mr. Hale's company," Alexander said, each word deliberate, "is not entirely appropriate for a duchess." Alara felt a flare of something hot and unexpected, anger. She had not felt angry in months, the numbness had swallowed everything. But now it rose, sharp and clean. "He has been nothing but respectful and helpful. He has shown me more consideration than I have received under this roof." The silence that followed was deafening. Alexander's expression flickered, something wounded, quickly hidden. For a split second she thought she saw regret there. Then the mask slammed back into place. "Do not mistake his kindness for something it is not," he said quietly, then turned and walked back into the house, leaving her standing alone on the steps with the wind tugging at her skirts. That night Alara lay in her bed staring at the canopy, her heart a tangle of confusion. For the first time she had glimpsed something in her husband besides cold indifference. She had seen jealousy. She had seen possession. And beneath it, perhaps, something that looked almost like fear. But fear of what? Of her. Of losing her. The thought was so absurd she almost laughed. How could he fear losing someone he had never truly held? Lady Seraphine arrived a fortnight later in a flurry of silk and French perfume. She was a widow, exquisitely beautiful, with hair the color of spun gold and eyes like polished emeralds. She swept into Ashworth Hall as though she owned it, greeting Alexander with an easy familiarity that made Alara's stomach clench. "Alexander, darling," she purred, offering her cheek for a kiss. "You look positively haggard. What have you been doing to yourself?" To Alara's astonishment, Alexander actually smiled. It was a small smile, but it was there, curving the corner of his lips. "Seraphine, you are as subtle as a trumpet. Welcome." He did not introduce Alara immediately, and she stood to the side, feeling like an intruder in her own home. When he did remember her, the introduction was brief. "My wife, Alara." Lady Seraphine's gaze swept over her with a polite but assessing coolness before she turned back to Alexander and began chatting about mutual acquaintances and London gossip. In the days that followed, Seraphine and Alexander spent hours in his study with the door closed. They took long walks in the gardens together, their heads bent in intimate conversation. At dinner, Seraphine monopolized the Duke's attention with witty stories and laughing glances, while Alara sat mostly silent, pushing her food around her plate. The servants began to murmur. One evening, as Alara passed the servants' stair, she heard a housemaid whispering to a footman, "Lady Seraphine and his Grace were betrothed once, they say. Before the old Duke died. She's the one he should have married. not the quiet little mouse he got. Ilara's step faltered. She stood frozen in the dim corridor, the words slicing through her last fragile defenses. So it was true. There had been another woman, a woman he smiled for, a woman he let into his study, into his confidences, into the private chambers of his heart where she had never been allowed. She walked away before she could hear more, but the damage was done. The careful wall she had built around her heart crumbled. She was not just ignored. She was a replacement, a duty, a burden he had shouldered because honor demanded it. And now the woman he truly wanted was living under the same roof, and Ilara was nothing but an obstacle. That night she did not cry. She had grown too tired for tears. Instead, she sat at her little writing desk and composed a letter to her mother's elderly cousin in the north, a kind woman who had once written that if Ilara ever needed a quiet place to rest, her door was open. She wrote carefully, her handwriting steady, asking if she might come for a visit, perhaps an extended one. She did not write the words that screamed inside her heart, "I cannot bear this anymore. I have to leave before I disappear entirely." She folded the letter and set it aside to be posted in the morning. The next day something shifted. She did not go to the village. She did not arrange flowers or review the household accounts. She moved through the halls like a ghost, speaking only when spoken to, her expression calm and distant. At luncheon she excused herself early. At tea she was absent. She could feel Alexander's eyes on her, a weight that followed her across rooms, but she did not meet his gaze. She had stopped seeking him out, and in doing so she had reclaimed something of herself. He found her in the small sitting room that evening. She was standing at the window, watching the twilight deepen over the parkland. She had not heard him approach. He moved as silently as a shadow, and when she turned, he was already closing the door behind him. "You have been avoiding me," he said. It was not a question. She folded her hands in front of her. "I did not think you would notice, Your Grace. You have been occupied with your guest. Lady Seraphine is my cousin." Ilara's heart gave a strange, painful lurch. Cousin. My father's sister's daughter. She was never my betrothed, whatever the servants may be gossiping about. She was married to a diplomat. She has helped me with certain delicate matters. Ilara's mind spun, but the cold, hard knot in her chest did not loosen. "You never told me. You never asked." His voice was flat, but there was a tension beneath it, a tightly leashed emotion she could not identify. "I did ask," she said quietly. "In the beginning I asked you so many things. You never answered. You gave me nothing, Alexander. Not your time, not your thoughts, not even the truth about your own family. How could I ask about something I did not know existed?" He stood very still. The firelight carved harsh shadows under his cheekbones. For a long moment he simply looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes she had never seen before, a raw, desperate helplessness that seemed utterly at odds with the powerful man he was. "There are things," he said slowly, "that I could not tell you, things that would have placed you in greater danger." "Danger?" She let out a laugh that had no humor in it. "What danger? I have been locked in a beautiful gilded cage for half a year, invisible and unwanted. The only danger here is losing my mind." He flinched. The movement was so slight she almost missed it, but she saw it, and the sight shocked her into silence. Then he did something that stole the breath from her lungs. He crossed the room, pulled a leather folder from a hidden drawer in his desk, and held it out to her. "Read these," he said hoarsely. "Read them and then tell me I did not care." Ilara hesitated. Her fingers trembled as she took the folder and opened it. Inside were letters, dozens of them, all written in a harsh, scrawling hand. The first was dated a year ago, before her father's death. She began to read, and with each word the floor beneath her seemed to dissolve. "If the Morwindets are not satisfied, I will take the girl as my wife. You cannot protect her from me forever. I know what her mother was. I know the scandal that would ruin her if it ever came to light. You think you can keep her clean. I will drag her through the mud unless those lands are signed over to me." Another letter, dated just after the wedding. So you married her. Clever, Ushwath. But do you think marriage will stop me? I will destroy her reputation so thoroughly that even your precious title won't shield her. Release the Mohan lands to me, or I will make your little duchess a social outcast. And if you dare show her affection, I will know. I have eyes in your household. You will keep your distance, or you will watch her suffer. Alara's hands shook violently. She looked up at Alexander, who stood with his back to her, one hand braced against the mantel as though he needed the support. His head was bowed. Blackthorn, she whispered, he's been threatening you all this time. He wanted your lands, Alexander said without turning. He was going to force you into marriage to get them. When I took you instead, he turned to blackmail. He discovered an old scandal about your mother, something from her youth, something she kept hidden until her death. He was going to expose it, ruin your name, humiliate you so thoroughly you would never recover. So I made a bargain with him. I bought silence with payments and legal delays while I gathered evidence against him. And I kept you at arm's length because if he ever suspected I loved you, he would have used it. He would have hurt you to hurt me. The words hung in the air like a struck bell. If he ever suspected I loved you. Alara's knees felt weak. You kept me at a distance to protect me. I kept you at a distance because I am a coward, he said, his voice cracking. I told myself it was for your safety, and that was partly true. But I was also terrified of how I felt, terrified that if I let you close, I would not be able to let you go, that I would fail you. I have loved you, he said, and the words seemed to be torn from him, from the moment I saw you at the Harvest Fair 5 years ago. You were 17, standing by the cider press, laughing with your father, and I thought I had never seen anything so beautiful. I drew a sketch of you that night. I have carried it with me ever since. He opened a small compartment in the desk and withdrew a folded piece of paper, worn at the edges. He handed it to her without meeting her eyes. Alara unfolded it with numb fingers. It was a pencil sketch, done with surprising skill, of a young girl with wind-blown hair and a joyous smile. She recognized the dress she had worn that day, a blue-sprigged muslin that her mother had sewn. She remembered the fair, the taste of fresh apple cider, the way her father had spun her around to the fiddler's tune. She had been happy then, so completely, foolishly happy. And all the while someone had been watching her. Someone had seen her and loved her, and kept that love locked away in a desk drawer. I never forgot you, Alexander said hoarsely. When I heard about your father's death and Blackthorn's intentions, I moved heaven and earth to get to you first. I told myself I was doing my duty, saving a gentlewoman from a monster. But the truth was far more selfish. I could not bear the thought of another man having you. So I married you, and I swore I would keep you safe, even if it meant you never knew the truth, even if it meant you hated me. Alara's vision blurred with tears. They spilled over, tracking silently down her cheeks. The anger and numbness that had sustained her for months crumbled into something softer, something aching and raw. She saw him now, really saw him. Not a cold, unfeeling stranger, but a man who had been drowning in fear and love and had never let himself cry for help. Why, she whispered, did you not tell me any of this? Because I was afraid you would not believe me, he said, his voice breaking at last. Because I had pushed you away so long that I did not deserve your trust. Because I thought if you knew the danger, you would insist on helping and I could not risk losing you. I have been a fool, Alara. A proud, stubborn fool, and I have hurt you more than Blackthorn ever could. He turned then, and the sight of his face stole her breath. The mask was gone entirely, and what remained was a man raw with regret, his gray eyes wet, his composure shattered. He looked at her as though she were the only fixed point in a spinning world. I know I am too late, he said, his voice dropping to barely a whisper. I saw the way you looked at William Hale, the way you smiled. I thought I had lost you to a kinder man. I have been burning with it for weeks. But I cannot let you go without telling you the truth. I love you. I have loved you since before you knew my name. And if you will give me the smallest chance, I will spend the rest of my life making up for every cold word, every silence, every moment you spent believing you were unwanted. The room was so quiet she could hear the soft crackle of the fire, the distant tick of the clock. Allura stood clutching the sketch, her heart a battlefield. She thought of all the nights she had waited, all the tears she had shed, all the strength she had built from the wreckage of her hopes. And she realized with a clarity that felt like dawn breaking that she had not stopped loving him. She had only buried that love so deep she had forgotten it was still alive. "William Hale," she said, her voice shaking but steady, "is a good man. But he is not you, he never was. I did not want him to be." Alexander took a step toward her, hesitant as if approaching a wild bird. "Then is there hope for me?" She set the sketch carefully on the desk and closed the distance between them. She reached up and, for the first time since their wedding, she touched his face with her bare fingers. His skin was warm beneath her palm, and he closed his eyes as though the contact were a benediction. "There is hope," she said softly, "but you have to promise me something. No more secrets, no more walls. I cannot live in a fortress. I need a home." He opened his eyes, and the look in them made her heart constrict. "You are my home. You always have been. I will tear down every wall I ever built, I swear it." He caught her hand and pressed it to his lips, and she felt the tremor that ran through him. The great Duke of Ushwath, so feared in business and politics, was trembling against her fingers. She realized then that he was not just protecting her, he had been bleeding in silence too. "Blackthorn," she said after a moment, "what happens now?" The mention of the name brought a hard edge back into his eyes, but it was not the coldness she had known. It was the steel of a man preparing to protect what was his. "Seraphine has been helping me. Her late husband was a diplomat and she has contacts who have been uncovering Blackthorn's crimes. Fraud, blackmail, possibly worse. Tomorrow the authorities will receive a full report. He will be taken into custody before the week is out. You are safe, Allura. I promise you that." She nodded slowly. "And Lady Seraphine, she has been a friend to you, not a rival." "She thinks I am a complete idiot for how I have handled this," Alexander said with a ghost of a rueful smile. "She will be delighted to hear you have forgiven me. She may actually weep with relief. She has been threatening to knock my head against a wall for months." A small, trembling laugh escaped Allura. It felt strange, this lightness, after so much heavy silence. They stood together in the quiet sitting room, the fire slowly dying to embers, and talked into the night. She told him about the aching loneliness, the slow death of hope, the way she had rebuilt herself piece by piece in the village school. He told her about his own isolation as a young duke, his terror of vulnerability, the way his love for her had grown in the shadows until it consumed him. They spoke the truths that should have been spoken months ago, and with each confession, the distance between them shrank. The Baron was arrested 3 days later, his house searched, his papers seized. The scandal Allura's mother had hidden for decades was quietly buried under a mountain of Baron Blackthorn's own crimes. The whispers in society turned from the Duke of Ushwath's cold marriage to the dramatic downfall of a villain, and Allura found herself free of the threat that had hung over her head unawares. Lady Seraphine departed with a warm embrace for Allura and a pointed look at Alexander. "Do not muck this up again," she said cheerfully, and swept out to her carriage, leaving behind the lingering scent of perfume and an echo of laughter. The house felt different after that, lighter. The servants noticed the change, though they were too well trained to remark upon it openly. The Duke no longer retreated to his study for hours on end. He walked with Allura through the gardens, his hand finding hers as naturally as breathing. They visited the village together, and he stood in the doorway of the little school, watching her help a child with her letters, his expression so full of quiet wonder that old Mrs. Cotter, the teacher, later remarked to a friend, "I do believe the Duke has fallen in love with his own wife." It was not a fall, though, it was an awakening. On a warm evening in late summer, Allura and Alexander sat on a stone bench overlooking the lake. The water reflected the soft pastels of the sunset, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wild roses. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and he rested his cheek against her hair. "I used to sit here alone," he murmured, and imagine what it would be like to have you beside me. It was the only comfort I allowed myself." She lifted her head and looked at him. In the fading light, the harsh lines of his face had softened, and his eyes held a peace she had never seen before. "And now?" she asked. He smiled, a real, full smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes. "Now I know that my imagination was a pale, poor thing compared to the truth. You are more than I ever dared to dream, Alara, and I thank God every day that you did not give up on me." "I almost did," she admitted, "but I think my heart never truly let go. It was too stubborn." He lifted her hand and kissed it, his lips lingering. "Then I am grateful for stubborn hearts." They stayed there until the first stars appeared, wrapped in a silence that was no longer empty but full of unspoken promises. The wounds of the past months were healing, and in their place grew something stronger: trust, tenderness, and a love that had been tested and had not broken. Later, as they walked back to the hall hand in hand, Alara paused and looked up at the sprawling silhouette of Ashworth Hall against the twilight sky. It no longer felt like a gilded cage. It felt, for the first time, like a home. "There is one thing I still do not understand," she said softly. "Only one," he teased gently. She laughed under her breath. "Why did you keep the sketch all those years?" He stopped and turned to face her, cupping her face in his hands as though she were something infinitely precious. "Because it was all I had of you. Because even then, some part of me knew you were my future. I could not let you go, even on paper." Tears pricked her eyes again, but they were tears of a different kind now. Tears of healing, of wonder, of a heart too full to contain its own joy. She rose on her toes and kissed him, a soft and tender kiss that said everything words could not. When they drew apart, he kept her close, his forehead resting against hers. "I will spend my life making you smile like you did at that fair," he promised. "Every day, if you will let me." "I will hold you to that," she whispered. And he did. Through the turning seasons, through quiet mornings and starlit evenings, through the ordinary, breathtaking miracle of a life shared, he kept his promise. The cold Duke became a man who laughed, who danced with his wife in the great hall when no one was watching, who read aloud to her by the fire and never, ever let a day pass without telling her she was loved. The sketch remained in his desk, but now she often took it out and looked at it, not with sadness for lost years, but with gratitude for the journey that had brought them here. It reminded her of the girl she had been, full of hope and light. And looking at the woman she had become, loved, cherished, strong, she knew that girls' dreams had not died after all. They had only been waiting, folded quietly inside a Duke's silent heart, ready to bloom when the time was right.